I led the race for the first 2 laps. I was in the turn, passing the pylons, and of course all my attention is devoted out here in front of me because we're only about 30 feet above the ground. And I'm doing about 225 miles an hour. All of a sudden, I feel this bang, 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 bang. And I was actually in a little bit of trouble because of where I was sitting. And I started a right turn, and as I started that right turn, I noticed my right wing, and my wingtip looked like turkey feathers. I had noticed also that after I had this bang, 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 and that the other airplanes all landed. And so Don walked up to me and I said, "Don, what happened?" And he said, "You mean you don't know that Rocky hit you and that he went in?" I said, "No."
On Friday, December the 19th, Bill Jordan left. He was going to the battlefront in Korea to spend Christmas with the troops out there. He took a few shots on the way. That's near Bangkok. He was there by Monday morning. Not bad going. Only a couple of days later, and he was over Seoul, the capital of South Korea. The Korean War seemed perhaps remote when he was at home. But the British Overseas Airways Corporation had shown him just how near it was. Less than 5 days away. He soon had his camera out. Yes, that's him back in uniform again. And he took a few shots of the countryside, bleak and very miserable and cold. The front line wasn't far off. But now it was Christmas Day, and the boys of the Royal Fusiliers were determined to forget the war for a day or two, if the enemy would let them. They were in great spirit, these chaps, like Ernie Costin, whose home is in Stepney, or his pal from Sunbury in Middlesex, Pat Saunders. They couldn't get home, but they were darn sure they were going to enjoy themselves just the same. Even as breakfast was going on, Jordan found Bill Ballantyne of Belfast and Jim Batt, who comes from Croydon, hard at the old routine. Londoner Reg Lord, he's from West Ham, looked pretty pleased with life. So did Tony Dallingers, and no wonder. That grub was really good. Then came the cards from home. Company Sergeant Major Robin Hawkinson considered them more welcome than the grub. Neighbours in New Cross will recognise this chap, Roy Stewart. Lunch preparations were soon underway. Thanks to an extra special effort from the cooks and the NAFI caterers, they were to have turkey with all the trimmings. It may not have looked like the Ritz, but Larry Townley, the cook, would have held his own against any chef anywhere for patience and skill. That same Christmas morning, Bill Jordan attended a service for men of the Durham Light Infantry. It was cold on that barren hillside, but they forgot that as they joined in the carols that back at home families were singing in their own churches. Guns were quiet. No sound came from the enemy lines, and for those few moments, war seemed very distant. The message of Christmas is the same in war-torn Korea as throughout the world, that this is the time for peace on earth and goodwill to all men. The service ended, and it was back to the cookhouse to begin eating all over again. Dick Deller, the cook, said it would be just like dinner at home. Well, it was and it wasn't. They didn't go in for any luxuries like plates. Mess tins had to do. But you have to hand it to those chaps. It tasted just fine. There was plenty of it, too. Turkeys, sausages, pork, roast potatoes, peas and cabbage. And then to follow, Christmas pudding with rum sauce, mince pies, sweets and fruit. In fact, the lot. As Christmas Day guests, they had some South Koreans. They couldn't understand Bill, and Bill couldn't understand them. But they got along just fine. Besides, their mouths were too full most of the time for talking. Dinner went on for many hours, and everyone agreed that the Army had really excelled itself. Somebody said it was the first time in history that the duty officer hadn't got a reply when he asked if there were any complaints. Corporal Jim McCabe from Newcastle and CSM Hawksworth of Howell really enjoyed themselves. There was plenty to drink, too. Beer or fruit squash was on the menu, though Private Ron Patterson of Sunderland stuck to beer. Off came berets and tin hats, and on went paper hats as things warmed up. Here's someone Durham folk may recognise, Lance Corporal Len Gowans of Cuxhaw. Another Durham lad is Bill Stapleforth. here's a chap from Cornwall, Private John Gardens, whose home is in St. Fast. From Borden comes Sergeant Weason. But even while they were celebrating Christmas, men like Jeff Wharton and his pal Tuck Collins were keeping guard. Christmas was nearly over, but the war still went on.
It is at this point, General Marshal, that we're going to present the photographic record of the Korean War, starting with the 8th Army's offensive the day after Thanksgiving in 1950. An operation beginning with high hopes, but one which was quickly changed in its tactical complexion.
8th Army's end of the war offensive was launched the day after Thanksgiving in 1950. It started out smoothly, but by nightfall of the second day, the UN was facing a new enemy in Korea, and a new war had begun. The Chinese rolled swiftly southward, splitting the Allied line and cutting off Marine and 7th Division troops in the east near the Chosin Reservoir.
We took turns sleeping in the daytime. It was too cold at night. I heard later we lost more people from freezing than from enemy action. Even the mortar rounds froze through the casings. The Chinese had an awful lot of people between us and the beach, but the harbor at Hungnam was our only way out. All our resupply came by air. Without that, we never could have made it. Same goes for the close air support we got from the Marine Air Wing and the Air Force.
They fought their way toward the sea through an enemy force which outnumbered them 5 to 1. Pausing only to evacuate wounded by air from Hagaru, they pushed on, reaching safety on December 10th. They found Hungnam a busy town. Within the harbor's perimeter, heavy weapons worked around the clock, throwing up a curtain of fire through which the enemy divisions dared not pass. Behind the guns, a near miracle of planning, organization, and teamwork was taking place. A massive amphibious landing in reverse. In the space of 10 days, more than 100,000 fighting men were evacuated. North Koreans by the tens of thousands flocked to the dock area to plead for evacuation. From this one area, more than 90,000 North Koreans deserted their homes rather than return to the life they had experienced under communism.
We were the last to leave. When we were gone, the harbor would be too. We set blocks of TNT and laced hoses filled with jellied explosive all along the waterfront. When we left, the harbor was one big ticking time bomb.
The evacuation convoy steamed southward toward the free ports of Pusan and Pohang. Their troops would reland, regroup, and move back to engage the enemy. The military withdrawal by land was orderly as the rest of the 8th Army pulled back once again across the 38th parallel. But for hundreds of thousands of civilians trying desperately to outrun the advancing communists, the journey southward was a nightmare of cold, weariness, and confusion. Old people pulled loads meant for oxen, or carried their precious few belongings on their backs. Children who had no part in the causes of war received full measure of its hardships just the same. On December 27th, General Ridgway arrived to replace General Walker, killed in a tragic Jeep accident. He was just in time for the enemy's New Year's Eve offensive. Once again, UN troops pulled out of Seoul, blowing the Han River bridges behind them. Incheon, like Hungnam, was evacuated by sea. Here, too, we took pains to leave nothing behind which the enemy could use. In the south, the troops which had been taken off the beach at Hungnam were regrouped, and despite bitter weather, took advantage of a welcome opportunity to catch up with themselves. By mid-January, the enemy offensive had bogged down. Using fire-hardened troops, Ridgway launched a series of short, high-powered thrusts called Operation Killer. The enemy held a huge numerical advantage. Ridgway was out to eliminate it. Assault units moved up, expecting to meet great strength. They found surprising weakness. Under the pounding raids of Operation Killer, the enemy fell back. Ridgway pressed the advantage. No rest for the enemy, and not much more for 8th Army.
If anybody ever invents a mattress that feels half as good as a patch of frozen ground felt then, he'll make $1 million.
Although destruction of enemy forces remained its prime objective, Operation Killer had evolved into a ground-gaining operation.
The way things were going, we couldn't stay outnumbered for long. The word was they were losing 10 men to our 1.
For 6 weeks, the seasoned fighters of 8th Army scoured the countryside, inflicting fantastic losses on the retreating Reds. On March 7th, the enemy's main stronghold east of Seoul was smashed. The next step would be Seoul itself. On March 15th, Korean troops entered the city. They found a few old people and children. The communists had fled. Across the full width of the peninsula, the enemy was retreating.
Figure this one out. We're chasing them, and they're leaving surrender posters behind for us.
In April, General James Van Fleet arrived to take over the 8th Army. A canny tactician, he replaced General Ridgway, who had been appointed Supreme Commander when General MacArthur returned to the United States. Within a week of Big Jim's arrival, he was fighting off the Communist Spring Offensive. The Communists concentrated their barrages on the East Central Front, probing for a weak spot into which to pour their tides of humanity. All available UN forces were needed to slow the enemy's human wave tactics.
We had a routine. Hold till the ammo ran out, then pull back and call for an airstrike. When
foul weather grounded the Air Force, units north of Seoul were forced back across the Imjin River. Seoul was fortified against the coming second wave of the Red Offensive. Van Fleet was determined not to lose the capital city again.
Whoever said the worst part about war is the waiting was right. Still, we didn't have to wait long.
Every road, every valley approach had been zeroed in beforehand. The enemy lost thousands of men breaking through the curtain of fire, then faltered and lost his advantage. As the enemy turned once again to retreat northward, Van Fleet followed with mobile firepower. By June 2nd, we had recrossed the parallel. The enemy had spent 200,000 men, a third of his entire force, and gained nothing but the knowledge that numbers were not enough. Operation Killer continued without letup. Within a month, truce feelers materialized into the first meetings at the red-held city of Kaesong. World peace hopes soared. The chief UN negotiator was Vice Admiral Turner Joy. His opposite number, North Korea's chain-smoking General Nam Il. Pessimistic correspondents predicted the talks would drag on for as long as 6 weeks. With the opening of truce negotiations, the line became stabilized. With minor fluctuations, it would remain much the same until the ceasefire. New battle techniques were developed. In the eastern sector, a Marine battalion made history by securing a hill in no man's land from the air by helicopter. The first wave landed a shore party which would clear the small landing area needed. In a matter of minutes, the first copter load of aerial cavalry was arriving, fully equipped, fresh, ready for action. By using copters, the Marines secured commanding high ground within enemy territory without having to fight their way to it. Copters supplied the operation and evacuated troops at its completion, opening the way to a new concept in tactical troop movement. In Kaesong, the truce talks were already bogging down, deadlocked over the issue of a ceasefire line.
We didn't like the setup in Kaesong. It was the enemy's home ground, and he knew it. Nam Il used the talks as a propaganda loudspeaker. The so-called neutral area was crawling with armed red soldiers. We broke off the talks.
Air Force Sabre Jets ruled the skies. At this point in the fighting, the UN had lost less than 80 aircraft. Verified kills on communist planes numbered 510. On the sea, as in the air, United Nations firepower went virtually unchallenged. Near the end of October 1951, truce talks were resumed at the tiny farming village of Panmunjom. The UN delegates offered a compromise. They would accept the communist proposed ceasefire along the present battle lines if all other problems could be ironed out within 30 days. If not, all bets were off. The war virtually stopped, except for the constant booming of artillery. Winter came, the deadline was passed, the war was on again. The deadlock issue now was the right of prisoners to free choice in the matter of repatriation. Both sides were adamant. Meantime, across the breadth of Korea were fought the Bloody Hill battles, names not difficult nor pleasant to remember. Wooded slopes were laid bare, pitted almost beyond believing. This war had reverted to the style of 1914, opposing trench lines facing one another, night patrolling and local attacks across the no man's land which lay between. It was costly, but there was no clear way out. The big break came in April 1953 with little switch. Stalin had died in March, and Malenkov had taken over. Immediately, he launched his worldwide peace offensive, and the Chinese agreed unconditionally to General Clark's standing proposal to exchange sick and wounded prisoners. The exchange went smoothly, and truce talks were resumed. Encouraged, the world listened for news of the final signing that would mean ceasefire in Korea. It came on July 27, 1953. While the communists signed at Panmunjom, General Clark, in ceremonies at the UN base camp in Munsan, signed 6 copies of the document which would end the bloodshed. There was excitement, but little rejoicing.
We have stopped the shooting. That means much to the fighting men and their families, and it will allow some of the grievous wounds of Korea to heal. Therefore, I am thankful. The task now is to put the ceasefire agreement into full effect and get down to working out an enduring settlement of the Korean problem. I cannot find it in me to exult in this hour. Rather, it is a time for prayer, that we may succeed in our difficult endeavor to turn this armistice to the advantage of mankind.
When World War II ended in 1945, hopes ran high around the world that new conflicts could be avoided, while people everywhere tried to heal their wounds and sorrows and build a more peaceful planet. Just 5 years later, in June 1950, those high hopes collapsed when communist North Korea invaded the Republic of South Korea. Since the end of World War II, Korea had been divided, split in half, as a result of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. The UN condemned the invasion. China and the Soviet Union supported North Korea. Troops from 21 countries fought against the Communist North. Nearly 90% of those fighters against North Korea were American. More than 36,000 Americans died.
Gentlemen, I wish to welcome you to the 51st Fighter Interceptor Wing in Korea. While you are here, and in a very short period of time, I think, you will realize why the Fighting 51st has compiled one of the best combat records in the history of the United States Air Force.
This was the first war when jets ruled the skies. In the early days, the new wave of jets, the Air Force P-80 and the Navy F-9F Panther jet, dominated the Russian propeller-driven planes. Among those flying the Panthers were soon-to-be astronaut John Glenn, the late Red Sox great Ted Williams, and the late Neil Armstrong. But the American advantage soon shifted when the Russian swept-wing MiG-15 entered the war. The U.S. countered with the F-86 Sabre Jet. The U.S. Air Force reports that the F-86 kill ratio was over 10-1, shooting down 792 MiG-15s and 108 other aircraft, while losing 230 Sabres out of the 674 F-86s deployed there. Russian and Chinese analysis disputes those numbers. The two sides fought to a stalemate, and in July 1953, an armistice was signed. The Koreas are still split in half, Communist North and Democratic South. After the MiG-15 came the Soviets' next-generation fighter, the MiG-17. In our program now, the men who flew and fly the F-86 Sabre and the MiG-17.
So today, I'm happy to have the Sabre Jet and the MiG here for this presentation with General Chick Cleveland and Randy Ball, the MiG pilot. And the thank you goes out to Doug Matthews, who owns this Sabre here, for sponsoring Chick Cleveland being here. And as I'm doing thank yous, it's the logo I'm standing on here, Scott's Miracle-Gro Company. We could not do this without the support of Scott's Miracle-Gro, so if you will go to the store and buy Scott's when you have a choice. We'd like to recognize them. Great supporters, and the other great supporters, Fagan Fighters World War II Museum. They're a little out of the way in Granite Falls, Minnesota, but their museum and what they do for warbirds and our veterans is phenomenal. And for those of you who have friends who would like to be here and cannot be here, we are being live broadcast. We received a message already from Brazil this morning from someone saying, thank you for what you're doing. So tell your friends if they want to see this, they can go to flyingondemand.com, and we're live streaming. So we're going, last year we went to 64 countries. That's pretty phenomenal, and we thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome David Hartman, our MC for this program. David.
Thank you all. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. And please welcome our two guests. Charles Cleveland first. Charles Cleveland, who will sit next to me, please, Charles. General. Chick. And Randy. Randy's out. Have a seat. Have a seat. We get another chair. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, directly in my left, Air Force Lieutenant General retired Charles Chick Cleveland, West Point graduate, decided to go Air Force, flew the F-86 in Korea, is an ace, shot down 5 MiG-15s. He commanded at many levels and staffed to the highest levels of the United States Air Force. He is highly decorated, Distinguished Flying Cross, with an Oak Leaf Cluster, the Silver Star, Distinguished Service Medal, Legion of Merit, Air Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster, and many more. This is Lieutenant General Charles Chick Cleveland. Randy Ball, next to him, has flown more. He holds the record. He has flown jets in air shows more than any other air show pilot. Over 1,000 performances flying jets. He also flies the Russian fighters, test flew them, and has over 1,000 hours in flying the Russian jets. So please welcome Randy Ball. Randy, who is on your left?
Well, Doug may not be turned on. It's Doug Matthews that owns and operates the beautiful Sabre to our left.
Right. Doug, welcome. Thanks for bringing your jet today. Let's start. Chick, West Point, but you decided to go Air Force. Why?
Well, I graduated in 1949. That was before there was an Air Force Academy. So the Air Force, or the Army, agreed that some percentage of our West Point graduating class could go Air Force, depending on your rank in the class. And I luckily succeeded and went Air Force, which is my choice.
How do you describe the West Point experience? What did you get from that?
TOUGH. I learned a lot. It was a life-changing experience for me. I didn't enjoy it while I was there, but it sure looks great in the rearview mirror.
I noticed that you were not designated an ace from Korea until 2008. That's well over 50 years after you were there. How did that all come about?
Well, that's a story in itself, and thank you, Fred. It takes a little time to tell a story.
Good.
I'll shorten it as much as I can. When I left Korea in October of 1952, I had 4 confirmed victories, 2 probable victories. And I was pleased with that mark. I was a lieutenant, not many of them did that. And I lived with that for over 50 years, as you say, until I met a friend of mine who was also an ace in Korea. His name was Dolph Overton, and we called him Didi, and Didi said, I know about your 2 probable claims. Why didn't you claim them as kills? And I said, well, I just didn't. He says, I'm gonna make one of those. I'm gonna confirm one of those 50 years later. And I laughed and forgot all about it. But he didn't. He worked for years. Finally found the Russian records, which they had given to the United States under glasnost. And those records were in the National Archives, too, at Silver Spring, Maryland. And he went up there, I went with him, got a disc of every Russian MiG-15 sortie flown in the Korean War. And we were able to narrow it down to September 21st, 1952, which is the date I had a probable. And the Russians admitted a loss in exactly the same time, same place, and same circumstances that I had claimed the probable. And so several years later, the Air Force said, okay, number 5 is confirmed.
March 1952, you arrived at Kimpo in Korea. What was the situation on the ground at the time? Where were the North Korean troops? What was going on the ground? What was going on in the air?
Well, we were pretty much stable. The bomb line was pretty much stabilized up north of. I was at Kimpo, which is just west of Seoul, and the combat zone, the demilitarized zone now, was 50 to 60 miles north of us, and American and UN troops were the south, and Chinese troops were to the north. So we were at that time a stalemate.
And your missions were flying the F-86.
I'm glad you asked that question. The answer is air superiority. That's what the F-86s were charged with, is to establish, maintain air superiority. And that fluctuated back and forth during the war. The North Koreans had it when they first invaded the South in June of '50, but then our Air Force, with some help from the Navy, destroyed the North Korean Air Force totally. I mean, wiped them out in the air and on the ground. And so we had full air superiority at the time, and our fighter bombers were the F-51 at that time, the F-84, F-80, and the 84. And then the Russians introduced the MiG-15 into combat. A big surprise to those of us in the West. And they established immediate air superiority with a 3-to-1 victory ratio over our straight-wing fighters. And that's when they brought the F-86s over to counter the MiG-15. And in some air battles over a period of many months, we gradually asserted United States Air Force air superiority. And I'm happy to say the reason it's so important is that our fighter bombers were supporting our troops, our United Nations troops, with air ground support, and were a key factor in what victories we had. But no United Nations troop, American soldier, or anywhere on the Korean Peninsula was ever subjected to bombing or strafing attack by enemy aircraft. That's because they wouldn't come that far south because the 86s would kill them.
Randy, compare, would you, the 86 and the MiG-15 in terms of just pure aerial capability?
Well, of course, the 15 was the first swept-wing jet that the Russians had, or Russians built. It was powered by a, folklore has it as stolen Rolls-Royce engine in it. It turns out later on that the British had sold them the technology before the Iron Curtain really came down. So it was very crude compared to the F-86. It didn't have as good a pressurization, didn't have near as good an ECS system, didn't have air conditioning at all. So in the summer months, it was pretty onerous in the cockpit. The G-suit system that they used, the valve was similar to the Sabre, but it had a reputation of sticking open or sticking closed, and so the pilot was intermittently getting a G-suit support when he's in a fight. The 15, when it first came out, had a altitude advantage over the Sabre, but the Sabre had a much better speed advantage, particularly in a dive. The Sabre could outdive it significantly, and the Sabre, of course, originally had a slat wing like this F-86 behind us. In the North American, Doug could probably tell you better, but it redesigned the wing to what they call a 6x3 wing, added square footage to the wing, which gave the Sabre a much better turning at altitude and a much better service ceiling. So interesting, the development between the two aircraft throughout the war. The 15 that was delivered to our country via a defector that Tom Collins and Chuck Yeager flew, they tried to get it to go supersonic and even dove it straight down from 48,000 feet, and Mach 9.2 is it. It would get into a terminal velocity and lose pitch authority and just go straight down. So the Sabre was a significantly better aircraft in the big picture than the MiG.
Doug, how did you come to own your Sabre?
This is my third Sabre. First two were the Canadian version, and I wanted to get 2 years ago another F-86, and there were very few available, and this one was for sale. The prior owner had passed away, and it was in Florida where I spent a lot of time, so I told him I'd take over the airplane and start the gradual refurbishment. We have another one in restoration, but it's a 36-month project, which every time I ask the crew chief how we're doing, he says it'll be another 36 months. So it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Did you fly military?
I did. I was in the backseat of the F-4 and flew the A-4 a little bit, and the F-9 Cougar, which was left over in the training command after Korea. Yeah, the Navy kept the F-9s until they introduced the A-4, TA-4s into flight training. So I was in the Navy. My parents were married, so I got in the Navy. If they hadn't have been, of course, I'd gone in the Air Force. No, I'm kidding, General. That was a joke, sir. No, my dad was Air Force, so.
General, when there were a lot of stories about MiG Alley. What was MiG Alley?
Well, that was a area south of the Yellow River. If you know your geography, you know the peninsula of Korea, 38th parallel, cut it right in half. The northern boundary to the North Korea was the Yellow River, which was a huge river, originated in Russia and flew north, east to southwest, emptied into the Yellow Sea. And MiG Alley was the area just south of the Yellow River. About 60 miles south was a river called the Chongchong. And if any of you have served in the Army, you'll know what the Chongchong River was, a river of death. But in that area was where most of the combat between the MiGs and the 86s occurred. And could I add just a little bit to the comparison between the MiG-15 and the 86? Both airplanes had strengths and weaknesses. The strengths of the MiG-15, which I think have been covered, was that it could out-accelerate and out-climb any 86, and that's a pretty good start. It had a great gun package, a 37 millimeter cannon and two 23 millimeter cannons with a rate of fire about 400 or 500 rounds per minute each. Luckily, it had a lousy gun sight, and their pilots weren't as good as we were. On the other, and the MiG-15 was rugged, and it was a fine little airplane. Big surprise to us when it showed up. The 86 was better constructed. It had a radar gun sight, the A1C gun sight. If you put the pipper on the target, even if he was pulling G's or cliving or diamond, if you fired, theoretically your bullet should hit the airplane. And the A1C was great when it worked, which was 50% of the time. The rest of the time, we fought actually with essentially a ring and bead sight. Our gun package was 650 caliber machine guns. Accurate, a lot of lead, but it was like shooting ping pong balls sometimes at the MiG-15, which was a very hardy constructed airplane. But we could hit, luckily the Russians, and the Russians, by the way, flew 75% of the MiG-15 sorties in Korea. The Chinese about 20%, the North Koreans about 5%, and a couple from Czechoslovakia, etc. But basically our enemy over there were the Russians.
Back to MiG Alley for a minute. Did you ever fly up in that area near the Yalu?
Yes, sir. Every day we flew, that's where we went. And we were there to challenge the MiG-15s to come up and challenge any Russian-made bombers that wanted to go south, and they didn't want to go. They tried it a couple of times and were destroyed by the F-86s. But most of the combat occurred in MiG Alley, just south of the Yellow River. And some, I might add, occurred north of the river.
General MacArthur is quoted as saying that he wanted to go across the river into China. Did you ever fly over the river and make it into China?
Next question, please. Yeah. Of course I did. Yes. And you took it was a gamble to fly there because a number of our guys got shot down north of the river and ended up in Chinese prison camp, which was but yes, there was some combat north of the river. Most of it was in MiG Alley.
So Randy, following the MiG-15 came your 17, right?
Correct. The
So
17,
what were the differences? Tell us that tale.
Well, yeah, the 17, and I'll tell you that, and then tell you a little bit about the one we've got here because it's unique in its own right. But the 17 was really a follow-up to the 15, much like a Super Hornet today is a follow-up to the Legacy Hornet. The regular 17, they tried to fix some of the high-speed defects in the 15. The MiG-17 would marginally go supersonic at the right altitude, right temperature, and so forth. It introduced the Soviet Union's first afterburner to a jet fighter. The wing was redesigned and went from a 42-degree sweep to about a 48 from the wing root to the center point where the drop tanks are hung. And then it's about a 45-degree sweep from there to the wing tip. It also has two different airfoils. It has an airfoil on the inner wing and a more cambered airfoil on the outer wing. And the design criteria from the Kremlin was they wanted an aircraft that would outturn any other fighter then in the sky. And as we found over Vietnam, it outturned anything we had. In fact, it outturned anything as a production aircraft until the F-16 first flew. So in a turning fight, it was a deadly aircraft. We learned to fight it above 23,000 feet in Vietnam and keep it into a more vertical fight, which is more our fight with the F-4. This particular 17 that's beside us is it's the only one of its type flying in the world. It was a add-on or a modified 17 in that when it was designed from the cockpit forward, it's 21 inches longer and has a radar. This was the Soviet Union's very first all-weather radar intercepting fighter. It was just built in 1960 and spent most of its days. It was withdrawn from service fairly early because the MiG-21s all had radar, but it was designed like the 15 to be an air superiority fighter from the Soviet standpoint.
How did you get into flying all these Russian airplanes? How did that come about?
Poor judgment. I use that line a lot. Guys with me, I think I'm probably tired of hearing it, but I started out flying air shows at the World War II stuff, A-26 and T-6 and various other World War II aircraft, and grew up around in Texas, outside of Breckenridge, Texas, which is one of the biggest warbird restoration facilities in the country. I did most of the restoration on all the Corsairs that came from the Honduras and El Salvador that were used in the TV show Black Sheep Squadron back in the late 70s and so forth. So as a kid, I was climbing all over a Mustang project or a Spitfire project or something, So since I was a kid, just eat up with it, So I got a gig some years ago flying a T-33. And so that was the first jet I ever flew. First drop of kerosene ever burned was in a T-33. And was introduced to a program that had some MiGs in it. And that was kind of my introduction to the MiG aircraft. And the 15, I've flown just briefly. And it's a nice flying airplane, I suppose. But the 17 is a beautifully flying airplane. It is just so balanced. You can just fly it with two fingers. It's just a great airplane.
Have you established relationships with Russian pilots over these many years?
A few, plus Polish, and I tell you a little story. Years ago, I was at an Air Force base. I just learned to fly the 17, and there were several former Eastern Bloc, East German pilots that had flown the 17 in active duty. And so I'd read the book a million times, and the book said that at a certain altitude and a certain speed, the aircraft would go 1.04 Mach. So I was asking these guys, because I didn't want to kill myself in the airplane, so I kept asking them questions about what about this, what about that, and I finally got around to the question about will it go supersonic. And one of the Germans about 3-4 bar stools down from me, he leaned back and goes, "Yes, it will go that fast, but it does not like it." So I never have tried to go supersonic with the aircraft. At an air show, if it's air smooth, I'll a lot of times hit 0.91, 92 at 10 or 15 feet off the deck on a straight pass. But it's not. I don't ever fly the aircraft supersonic. It's got a great rate of climb. On a cool day, you can get 30,000 feet in about 4 minutes with AB. So for its day, that was quite the hot rod.
Doug, when did you get this thing about F-86s, and to what extent have you branched out of the Sabre Jet territory?
Well, like most of these guys, I started as a kid building model airplanes and flying model airplanes, and then studied them and collected photographs. I think I had maybe the largest jet fighter collection of photographs in the world. I had like 2,000 by the time I went off to the academy, and been hooked on warbirds all my life. Started flying T6s and then got into P-51s and SBD, P-40, Corsair, then branched into the warbird jets. And I had set a goal a long time ago to fly every World War II fighter, and I haven't flown the P-38 or the P-47, but I've flown pretty much all the rest of them, including the Zero and the Spitfire. So.
Wow. You, I asked Chick about his West Point experience. Your Air Force Academy?
No, I got an appointment to the Naval Academy.
Naval Academy.
Yeah. I was going to go to the Air Force Academy, but
parents were married.
Parents were married, and yeah, and they were actually a man and woman at that time. And so I went to the Naval Academy, and of course, if you're going to fly airplanes, Air Force is probably the place to go. But I went to the Navy.
You flew Navy or you flew Air Force?
No, I went in the Navy, and
you did?
Navy
Yeah.
actually has an Air Force. A lot of people don't know that, but it's.
Well, my son's a Hornet pilot, so I'm up on naval aviation. Yeah, but now, so you're flying all the time now? You're flying shows?
I do stay busy. Yeah, we do. We've got. I brought 4 airplanes here, and I might do 10, 12 shows a year. It's very time consuming. By the time, as Randy knows, by the time you get your airplanes there and back, I've got other pilots to help me. But yeah, I try to fly in order to stay current. I've got 9 airplanes. I try to fly at least one a week for at least 30 minutes, and even then, I'm not so sure I should stay current in that many airplanes.
Chick, you were quoted as saying that you spent a year as executive assistant to General Westmoreland, and you're quoted anyway as saying that it was the toughest year of your entire nearly 40 years of active duty. Why? Why was it so tough?
Yeah, I was General Westmoreland's exec in 1966 and 67 in Vietnam. I was, quote, the office help for the most part. The reason I call it the toughest year of my career, and it was, for me personally anyway, because he was such a great man and a demanding boss. And there seemed to be damn little I could do to please him for the first 6 months. He called me Colonel Cleveland. I was LC at the time. And one morning, I think I'd done something right. He kind of ground his teeth and said, "Good morning, Chick." God, like he'd never said that word before. And he almost never said it again. But he was tough to work for. But I considered Westmoreland a great man. And if anybody has anything to say bad about him, don't say it while I'm around, please.
So, I just mentioned Navy and naval aviation versus Air Force aviation. How fulfilling, Chick, has your career been, active duty, and what's been most fulfilling about it?
Well, I spent 35 years in the Air Force and loved virtually every minute of it. I didn't enjoy getting shot at. I was never hit, by the way. Like I said, I didn't always enjoy my time with General Westmoreland, but it was a great career experience for me. But I love the idea of being able to fly airplanes, which I'd wanted to do since I was a knee height of a grasshopper. and do it in the service of my country. Very fulfilling. I'm a mission-oriented kind of guy and always was, and the Air Force gave me a great opportunity to fulfill that longing.
Doug, how fulfilling was your military career, and what was fulfilling about it?
You know, I stayed, I did the 4 years at Annapolis, and then 5 years active duty, and then another 5 in the reserves. I wanted to go to Vietnam. I knew, like Korea, it would be talked about forever. So I went and I did 2 tours, one in the air, one in gunboats in the Delta. And so that was an interesting experience to be in the heat of battle for 2 tours. Something you put behind you, and I know why guys don't talk about it. It's just not worth, you know, it's not something you sit around and talk about a lot unless you were with the other guy that was with you. But it was just great to serve in the Navy, and it was an honor.
Randy, same question. Whoops. Same question, Randy.
Well, I didn't serve either branch, and my parents were married to each other. It's just, I guess, first thing, it's a great honor to be sitting between these 2 guys. I'm just a guy that got lucky to get to fly lots of really neat aircraft and hopefully entertain a lot of people at air shows.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, questions and answer, Q&A time. We have microphones out there somewhere. Where are the mics? We're going to borrow one. Here, thank you, Doug.
It's not working, so I'll do it. I get it back? Well, you guys can share. Yes, they do.
Questions of these 3 gentlemen? Oh, here we go.
I see you guys sitting there. I know Doug Matthews has set a lot of records. I'd like to hear from Doug about. This is Jack Roush, by the way. I'm just facing the crowd here, but I'd like to hear about your records, especially that one at 41,000 feet in the Mustang.
Yeah, I'm glad you introduced yourself, Jack. You know, we've only known each other 10 years, but ladies and gentlemen, Jack Roush, a great NASCAR fellow and owns 2 P-51s, good pilot. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to. My goal was a couple years ago to break my 100th world record. I'd set a bunch of world records in time to climb and point to point, etc. And I continue to be amazed by the P-51, and I saw that the altitude record for that category and class of aircraft was 34,000 feet. And I know that during the big war that the fighters had gone that high. And I felt like I could break that. The book said, talked to Bud Anderson, and he says the book said the service ceiling is 41,000 feet. So how hard could it be? Now, P-51 has no, what we would call today, environmental control system. So there's no heat, pressurization, air conditioning, and anything. As you get up in the upper altitudes, it's 60 degrees below zero. But notwithstanding that, and a good portion of poor judgment, I launched off in May of 2013 and set the time to climb records for 20,000, 30,000, and 40,000, and set the absolute record of 42,500 feet in the P-51. The neatest thing about it, one really little vignette was FA had cleared me a corridor across southern Florida into the warning area over Fort Myers, and coming down the west coast is a big air traffic lane. They run you down the west coast and up the east coast. And I'm climbing through 41, crossing Fort Myers, and Miami says, Delta 417, unable your descent request. There's traffic climbing through your altitude at your 130, a P-51. There's this long silence, and the pilot on the radio comes back and says, say again the aircraft type? And Miami says, that's a North American P-51 fighter. He's going out into the warning area. Oh, way cool.
We got another question out here.
Question for the Colonel. Sir, do you still do any flying?
Oh, do you still fly? Do you still fly, General?
Oh, that's me? I don't fly as a pilot anymore. I fly as a passenger only reluctantly.
Yeah, but just before lunch, he said, "What airplanes have you got here?" And I told him T-33, P-51, F-86, Marquetti jet. I said, "I don't suppose you'd want to go for a flight, you know?" And he said, words to the effect of, "Heck yes, P-51." So he's going flying tomorrow.
Yay, yay. Any other questions? Questions for the three gentlemen?
Nope, I got another one.
Hey, good.
And one over there.
Next.
Hi, so I had a question about the airplane in front of us, the MiG-17. I see it has Polish markings on it, so I wanted to know a little about the history of this airplane.
Well, this aircraft was built in Poland in 1960. It's one of, I think, 198, about 200 to 200 of the PF-17. It's actually spelled MiG, M-I-M, capital M, little I, big G, dash 17, and then a capital P, capital F. And the P and the F stands for the radar. John that's here can probably tell you more about that, but the P and the F designate the two different types of radar that the aircraft have. It was the Soviet Union's, again, first all-weather radar intercepting jet fighter. There were two variants, this one with three 23mm cannons, and another one that had the same gun armament but also carried 4 ATOL missiles. So if that helps you any. They were withdrawn from service fairly early. This aircraft was built in 60, withdrawn from service in 64, and went into a aviation trade school where it was taken apart and put together and souvenirs taken off of it, etc., for several decades before left out in the field to rust away. Before it was rescued and brought to the States and restored.
How challenging is it to maintain it in good flyable condition?
Well, some of the parts are readily available, surprisingly enough. 20 countries flew the aircraft type. 2 still do. So the Chinese continued to build an engine for these things all the way up until 1989, new. So there's still a lot, they supported them from Pakistan Air Force retired their last 17 this last March. So they had modified, it had glass cockpits and modern ejection seats and so forth in it, but it was still a MiG-17. So other parts, you're fabricating them.
Oh, so, question.
Mr. Matthews, you said you flew the Spitfire and the F-86. I understand Bob Hoover thought that the F-86 is the best flying plane he ever flew. What do you say about that?
Mr. Hoover is always right. That's what I'd say. For me, the F-86 is really, as someone else said, you put it on. You don't get in it or strap it on. You really just wear it. It's very compact inside and very responsive aircraft. And one of my friends, Steve Hinton, who's has far more warbird experience than I do, said of all the airplanes he's ever flown, the F-86 is his favorite. So, but I defer to Bob.
And by the way, Bob will be with us later in the week in one of our shows here. I forget which day.
Friday.
Sir, Friday? Friday. Bob Hoover in the afternoon. Yes, sir. Kyle?
Another one. Where am I going?
This is a question for the general. Back in the Korean War days, was there any missile threats from the ground?
Neither from the ground nor from the air. But it was the relative ineffectiveness of the 50 caliber machine guns at long range which spawned the requirement for air-to-air missiles. And all services dabbled in it. The Navy stepped forward and developed the first air-to-air missiles. And from then on, the guns took a back seat. But the guns were the only thing in Korea.
Good.
Do you have one more?
Kyle?
Hello. I'd like to ask the two men that have served for us, do you guys have any experience serving with women? And if you did, was it positive?
I did not.
Can you?
General, did you serve with any women?
Yeah, I served with the women when I I was retired as commander of Air University in Maxwell, and had occasion to go. That's at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, and had occasion to go to Denver to talk to Dakowitz. You will know what Dakowitz is, Defense something or other Committee for the Women in the Service, and I requested to go with a woman instructor pilot, and she sat in the front seat, I sat in the back, and I was thoroughly impressed with her techniques, her professionalism, and I was able to report that to my speech to Dakowitz that night. And I've served with other women in higher ranks, in the general officer ranks, and they bring a lot to the table, and I'm glad to see they're getting their due finally.
Yeah, ma'am, by the way, on Saturday at 1 o'clock, our last program is going to be on the WASPs from World War II, and also Connie Boland, who's got a lot of hours, as you all know, and Heather Penny, F-16 pilot, was on duty 9/11 out of Andrews. So that's going to be an interesting time to talk about women in aviation coming up Saturday at 1 o'clock.
You know, David, I've got a lady in a pink shirt back there in the under the tent. This kind of goes along with this. She's not a woman in aviation as a pilot. She served in the Navy and crewed F-18 Hornets, and she now travels with me full time and crews the MiG-17 for me. She's right there.
Yeah. If there are no other questions, Sam Bass. I'll introduce you to Sam Bass, our colleague here. And the three gentlemen are going to walk around these airplanes, and Sam's going to learn a lot more about what they are. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thanks,
all
David.
three.
It was an honor, both of you guys.
Thanks, sir. Mine. Thanks, sir.
We also have John Blanchette here. He owns this airplane, the MiG-17, and he restored it. And he's going to tell us a little bit about the restoration on it. And between the two of them, between Randy, they're going to tell us about the airplane. And what we're going to really be doing here is kind of an FAA walk around, except if they tell the wrong answers, I'm not going to know the difference. So but we're just going to try to get you people informed about the particular airplanes. So if we start off, Randy, would you tell us something about the specifications of the airplane?
Sure. The aircraft has a top speed of about 715 miles an hour at level flight, about 0.994 in a typical configuration. With the drop tanks on it, it's has a fuel duration of about an hour and 40 to hour 45 minutes. The 17, like the 15, and like most of the Makovey and Gorovich designed aircraft, were designed as an interceptor. So they weren't really designed as a go-somewhere escort fighter. They were designed to climb quick, get into a dogfight, shoot down the American bombers, and return to a base that's probably right below them.
Okay, now this particular airplane, what was its design purpose? Now you mentioned the radar, but the MiG-17 itself, what would be its design purpose?
It was what they call a medium altitude air superiority interceptor. So in Vietnam, the MiG-21 would fly high cap. So from about 30,000 feet and above would be the MiG-21's rim, and from there down would be the MiG-17. The MiG-19 was used briefly during the war, and although we lost some aircraft to it, the 17 and the 21 were the two primary threat aircraft. In fact, we lost 81 U.S. aircraft to the MiG-17 in combat in Vietnam.
Now, this airplane without the afterburner and with the burner, what would be the thrust on it?
It's about 5,600 pounds of thrust dry, what we call mil power,
right,
and about 7,800 pounds of thrust in AB.
Okay, in combat, now what are we talking about as far as range?
Well, you know, you read the books.
Well, not range, hours of operation.
Yeah, you've got an hour and a half from engine start to flame out, and that means drops and all. So if you fly an hour somewhere, you're really wanting to have a runway below you pretty quick. It was very much like the British Spitfire. It was designed as a homeland defense fighter, as an interceptor.
So it's not supposed to have very long legs.
No, it was never designed to go somewhere. The Sukhoi series fighters were designed to actually go somewhere and fight. The MiGs were more like a homeland defense fighter.
All right, now the standard 17, what would be the armament on it, and is it the bomb load?
Well, you could carry 750 pounds of bombs or guided missiles onto the wings and the hard points, or drop tanks. The LIM 6 version was a later design. It also carried a multi-rocket launcher inboard of the drop tanks. The standard armament on a 17 was two 23 millimeters, which is a 90 caliber in U.S. terms, and a 37 millimeter cannon, just a little smaller diameter than a golf ball. Only carried 48 rounds in the big cannon, but as several of the Phantom guys I've talked to, it only.
And I believe you have one. Show the difference between that and the 50 caliber. Now the 50 caliber, what would be in the F-86?
Correct. Yeah, the 50 was in the F-86, and the 23 millimeter would be in the MiG-15 in the Korean War.
15 and a 17.
Yeah,
now
correct.
you've already touched on, mentioned the difference in the fuselage and the wing. Tell us about the air dams. What are the air dams on there for?
Well, Henrik, one of our mechanics that we bring over from Europe that works with us every year, made a joke at an air show one time that said it's to keep the air from defecting. But really, it's I guess in a way that's true. It's designed to control boundary air at a high pitch angle, and it's one of the keys that in the design of the wing that made the aircraft to be able to so pitch capable, or in the case of a dogfight, such a tight turning aircraft. The big deal though is not that it just can pull 8 Gs, but it can pull 8 Gs without bleeding energy. In an air show, which makes it a great air show aircraft, I can get 350 to 380 knots, roll it to a 90, pull 8 Gs, do a full 360, and exit the maneuver at or above the same speed I still entered it at. And that's the only aircraft until the F-16 that could do that.
Now, do you wear G-suit when you fly?
Yeah, I like to think I was John Wayne.
I was going to say, if you're pulling 8 Gs, how are you going to pull it?
Yeah, and sustain it all the way around. That's the big difference. It's not the initial pitch, but it's the sustained Gs that start hurting you.
All right, the last question, and then we'll talk to John here about the restoration of the airplane. You've flown a lot of different jets. How do you compare this jet to the other jets you've flown?
Well, from an air show standpoint...
Not Air Wisconsin either.
No, not Air Wisconsin either. But from an air show standpoint, it's a form of entertainment if you think about it that way. You know, we want to inspire the young kids and everybody else to fly like I was inspired when I was a kid to fly. But you also want to be able to demonstrate the aircraft to its capabilities so that the crowd can actually see the aircraft way it should be flown. A lot of the vintage jets, in fact, even some of the modern jets, if you get the aircraft to speed, 450, 500 knots or something like that indicated, go through the box, your time to turn the aircraft back around and back in front of the crowd is fairly significant. With a 17, if you don't mind hurting yourself, you can do 5G rolling reversals in the corners and still be never below 300 knots, and right back into the box you go. So from a performance standpoint, I mean, I'd hate to have to fight it because it would eat your lunch down in lower altitudes. Its maneuverability.
All right, how about now as far as the advantages and disadvantages of flying? I mean, every airplane's got some fault, so this has got to have something.
It doesn't have air conditioning, and that's a big deal. Especially when you're in a flight suit and G-suit and helmet and mask and gloves and so forth, and pulling Gs at an air show in the summertime, boy, you sweat like a. But at altitude, it's a nice flying airplane. It's got a couple of peculiarities. At a high altitude, it kind of wags its tail sometimes if it's a bumpy ride. But its biggest problem is, and when I'm working with a new pilot on the aircraft, is its lack of fuel. I can't stress enough to a new guy that, when you start the engine, it's fuel critical. Once you're airborne, it's fuel emergency. You've got an hour and 35 or 40 minutes till it's going to quit. So if you're cross country and everything has to be planned. You got to make sure the runway you're going to has got an alternate. All kinds of things that you don't think of sometimes in other aircraft. It's in your mind because you're only going to be airborne for an hour. And it's all about the fuel.
Well, now, speaking of the fuel, of course, you're burning a lot more fuel when you're in AB. If this airplane, you're in Vietnam and you operated out of AB and you're in battle, how much time you got with it then? 45 minutes?
Yeah, probably. Of course, you're going to be higher altitude than an air show, obviously. Sure. So it's a fuel burning efficiency is much better. The way the thing is designed, the drop tanks feed automatically. Unlike some of the other jets, there's no on and off for it. So they fill into the main tank, which is right behind the cockpit, constantly. That overflows into conforming tanks in the rear of the aircraft, whether the pilot wants them to or not. So the split second that he punches them off in combat, the aircraft is totally full of fuel. So at altitude, he's probably got an hour plus, unless he's combat maneuvering. And then, of course, as AB, you get about a 39% increase in thrust, but you're going to increase fuel burn by about 35%. So it's almost a one-for-one trade-off for the extra power.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. Let's talk to Ron here a little bit. Excuse me. I'm sorry. You restored the airplane. It's your airplane, and you did a long restoration on this thing. Tell us a little bit about the restoration on it.
I bought it in a scrapyard in Poland and had it shipped over here. And I was naive at the time because I was told that it needed a little work before you could put it in the air. And I thought I'd been working on cars for my whole life, and I thought you just fixed it up and you called a pilot over and he just went up and flew around a little bit. Well, I certainly learned that that wasn't the case. When it got here, it had been pretty well vandalized. It was pretty well corroded. Even the fuselage was twisted in transit. It had been taken apart on a cold winter day, and most of the parts had dropped into the snow and been lost. But I didn't know any better. I was kind of naive, so I just started work, piece by piece by piece. And about 15 years later, it finished. And then you started to operate it. Now you can restore it because you find out the parts that don't work now. And we're still changing parts, even to today. We have parts that are giving us problems.
Now, is this the paint job that when you got it, was this the paint scheme on it?
No, it had silver paint on it. After about 5 years, they started to paint them because it was too difficult to keep up natural metal. This has steel rivets on here, too, that will rust and have been sanded many times. So the Poles, after about 5 years, started to paint the aircraft. And then they'd go all over the plane every few years with DA sanders, and that's what all those marks are there. And they took the paint off and painted and put stripper. This paint job is what it was when it was built new in 1960. This is the way it came out of the factory. About 10,800 total were built, and less than 300 of this one, as far as I can determine, of this type of nose arrangement. Only one flying in the world, right. There's many in museums around the world. There's even one out at Pima in the museum there in the desert, been sitting there for years. But this is the only flying one. Well, I showed you the 23 millimeter, but there's 80 rounds per box, so it didn't fire like a machine gun. It went boom, 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 you know. But one hit would take down anything else.
All right. How about you, sir? I'd like for you to add something here.
What would you like me to add?
Whatever you want to.
Well, for those of you that ever aspire to flying something like this, I'd continue to encourage it. I started with flying T-33s and have owned an F-86. Absolutely love flying the 17, except for the heat and all that sort of stuff, downside for it. So wonderful flying airplane, just such a balanced airplane. I can see why it was such a good gun platform. You know, years ago when the F-4 was first being reintroduced back into the Heritage program, I spent 3.5 years flying as a threat aircraft at air shows with the Phantom, and some of the things that happened to that were really awe-inspiring to me. I would meet guys my dad's age that had flown Phantoms or 105s, et cetera, up at north of the Red River in Vietnam, and get stories of guys that shot down MiGs and guys that were shot down by MiGs, and we did some film work on that. Some of that stuff I think is online now with two aircraft flying together, and I think there's going to be a Phantom here this week, which will be its last public appearance before the Air Force officially retires the QF-4 program. So.
All right, Randy and John both, individually, of course, what got you into this Warbird program of restoring these airplanes and flying them for the people to look at?
I was naive and didn't know any better. 'Cause I thought you just fixed it up like you did a used car. But I found out that wasn't the case. So I just worked at it, and then it became, as I worked at it, I learned more and more about it and accumulated more parts, and it became more of a challenge. And then I realized it was going to be the only one flying in the world. So I really gave it the all after that.
How about you, Randy?
Well, I grew up part of the time in a little town called Riesel, Texas, outside of Waco, Texas, and then the rest of the time I spent on our family's cattle ranch north of Breckenridge, Texas. And Nelson Azell and started with Howard Purdue there, a Warbird restoration facility that's probably second only to Chino. to this day, you can go in there and there'll be a Spitfire building a Corsair wings from scratch, and Mustangs and a Hinkle, and just so as a kid getting to play with that kind of stuff and be around it, I was just ruined to do anything else.
Well, how about when you're on a tour, Randy, and you fly a lot? When you meet a veteran, what does it mean to you?
It means a lot. I mean, I have literally seen guys with tears in their eyes after the Phantom and the MiG got to fly together, and we're following each other around a tail slide. Coming up and telling stories that happened over Hanoi and about some of their buddies and things that happened to them. And here, you know, so a couple of years ago at Seymour Johnson, I flew against a Phantom there for the show where we did. Of course, I had to lose every time, but that's okay. It was so much fun. They had about 700 veterans from Vietnam there. And to hear those stories, and some of them brought their kids and said, you know, this is what it was like. And it was something from their war at an air show. And it's very rare to see anything from that conflict. We have lots of great stuff from World War II. We have some things from Korea, but we really don't represent our Vietnam veterans very well in air shows typically. So to fly a Phantom and a MiG together in the same sky was pretty special.
Okay. I want to thank you guys. Thank you for bringing it here. Thank you for the restoration.